vampire decade continues, and Mexican filmmakers alternate traditional vampires with variations on the topic. First up, a child vampire. Rostro Infernal and La Huella Macabra were shot back-to-back in February 1962. Huella is a direct sequel to Rostro, substituting the suave Guillermo Muray, formerly seen as vampire Count Subotai in El Mundo de los Vampiros, for Eric del Castillo as the protagonist, the villainous brain-drinking Count Brancovan. At the outset of Huella, Brancovan is exhumed by his mute servant Kunto. His face is horribly scarred and wrinkled, so he dons a realistic face mask and becomes the handsome Theo Van Jorn. Van Jorn has a nefarious scheme to avenge himself on his enemies from the first movie. Henchman Kunto is a bit too recognizable, so Van Jorn imports child vampire Eric to help with his sinister plot. Eric, who looks like a child but has a mix of childlike and adult traits, lets his bloodlusting appetite lead him into making errors which irritate Van Jorn. Eric is staked with a fireplace poker by his irate master, rapidly decaying into a wizened miniature corpse. Juvenile actor Umberto Dupeyron, who had a small role in Caperucita y Pulgarcito contra los Monstros, was cast as Eric. Van Jorn's henchman Kunto was played by Yerye Berute, a Costa Rican-born character actor who specialized in villainous roles. His notable fantasy film appearances include Ladrón de Cadáveres, El Ataúd del Vampiro, La Casa del Terror, and two of Boris Karloff's Mexican movies, Invasión Increíble and La Cámara del Terror. Rostro Infernal and La Huella Macabra were both directed by Alfredo B. Cravena from scripts by Alfredo Ruanova. Cravena, a German émigré, helmed a number of fantasy films during his career, including 60s vampire movies La Casa de los Espantos and El Pueblo Fantasma, both scripted by Ruanova, and La Dinastía Dracula in the 1970s. Argentine import Alfredo Ruanova was a prolific screenwriter in Mexico from the late 1950s through the 70s. He worked on the Nostradamus vampire series and the vampire movie La Endemoniada, in addition to numerous other fantasy movies. Although some sources indicate Rostro Infernal was dubbed into English for television exposure as The Incredible Face of Dr. B, La Huella Macabra was apparently never available in an English language version. Screenwriter Alfredo Salazar's prolific output for Cinematográfica Calderón was frequently inspired by the work of others. Frankenstein el Vampiro y compañía was an uncredited remake of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which went into production in mid-July 1962 at the Churubusco Studios. Manuel Loco Valdez, Teen Time's brother, and Jose Jasso fill the Bud Abbott and Lou Costello roles vaguely, with Quintín Bulnes, shorn of his mustache from Caperucita y Pulgarcito vs. Los Monstros, playing the vampire, and Roberto G. Rivera filling the Lon Chaney Jr. role as the Wolfman. The plot of Frankenstein el Vampiro y compañía follows that of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein reasonably closely, but the Mexican version has fewer laughs and thrills than the original. The director was Benito Alazraqui, who also helmed Santo vs. Los Zombies, Muñecos Infernales, and Espiritismo in this era. Vampire westerns are not completely unknown, but prior to 1963, the most notable of these was the 1959 Universal release Curse of the Undead. El Pueblo Fantasma, shot at the America Studios in 1963, borrows a few elements from the earlier picture. The vampire is a black-clad gunfighter killed in a showdown with the hero, who uses a bullet that has religious power. El Pueblo Fantasma was the second of 8 films in a Western series about Manuel Saldivar El Tejano, and the only one with fantasy content. Rodolfo de Anda starred as the hero in 6 of the series, and is opposed in this film by Fernando Lujan as the vampiric Rio Kid, who has 2 of the longest, most unwieldy vampire fangs in cinema history. Perhaps inspired by Hammer's horror of Dracula, in both La Huella Macabra and El Pueblo Fantasma, the vampire decays rapidly after being killed. El Pueblo Fantasma was another collaboration between director Alfredo Bicrevena and writer Alfredo Ruinova. In addition to De Anda and Lujan, the cast included veteran character actor Carlos Lopez Moctezuma, actress Elsa Cardenas, and singer-actress Julissa. Alfredo Salazar, Abel Salazar's screenwriter brother, became a director with El Charro de las Calaveras, probably shot sometime in 1965. This film actually appears to be a compilation of 3 episodes of a very low-budget, unsold television series about a masked Western hero who, with his faithful sidekicks, confronts a new monster each week. Although the film boasts a handful of well-known performers in the cast, Alicia Caro, David Silva, and Dagoberto Rodriguez, Caro and Silva are only in the first episode, and while Rodriguez was cast as the masked Charro, his face is only seen briefly in part 1 as well. Also appearing is longtime comic relief sidekick Pascual Garcia Peña. The first section of the film pitched the Charro against a werewolf, the second against a vampire, and the third features a headless horseman and his disembodied head. Sharp-eyed viewers will notice that the Charro's costume and juvenile sidekick change between episodes, suggesting these sections were shot at different times. The vampire in El Charro de las Calaveras has a very strange, wizened, almost simian look, and his costume resembles that of a comic book supervillain. Director-scripter Salazar also has a cameo role in the movie as the vampire's first victim. El Imperio de Dracula went before the cameras at the America Studios in July 1966. Although Caperucita y Pulgarcito vs. Los Monstros had been filmed in color and briefly featured a vampire character, El Imperio de Dracula was the first vampire-centric movie shot in color in Mexico. Unfortunately, the version of the film currently shown on television and released on DVD is a slightly edited black and white copy, although a complete color print was in existence as recently as the 1990s. Producer Luis Enrique Vergara, who would shortly hire Boris Karloff and John Carradine to appear in horror movies for him, brought in experienced genre director Federico Curiel, the man behind the Nostradamus series and many other fantasy films. The screenplay was written by Ramon Obon Jr., the son of the scripter of El Vampiro, El Ataúd del Vampiro, and El Mundo de los Vampiros. El Imperio de Dracula was his first script, written in 8 days. Although Bram Stoker's novel Dracula is credited on screen, the script bears little or no resemblance to the original book, and actually includes a number of ideas and motifs borrowed from both El Mundo de los Vampiros and El Vampiro Sangriento en la Invasión de los Vampiros. El Imperio de Dracula opens with a sequence very reminiscent of Hammer's recent Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Vampire Baron von Frankestein is exposed to sunlight and staked through his heart, turning into a pile of dust. Years later, henchman Igor drains the blood of a young woman into a coffin containing Drakelstein's ashes, magically reviving the vampire. This method was also repeated in Santo y Blue Demon vs. Dracula y el Hombre Lobo. Eric del Castillo plays Baron Drakelstein. Like Christopher Lee in Dracula, Prince of Darkness, del Castillo has little dialogue. He looks the part but displays no supernatural powers in the film. He doesn't turn into a bat and fails to conquer his mortal opponents in 4 extended fight scenes, including one against the much older and fatter Victor Alcocer. Fernando Ocez returns to vampire cinema, playing the unimaginatively named Igor. He had been a henchman in Santo vs. Las Mujeres Vampiro and the titular villain in El Barón Dracula. The hero's role went to Cuban actor Cesar del Campo, and singer-actress Lucha Villa played his wife. To illustrate how important El Vampiro was to Mexican cinema, the key art used for the poster and ad mats of El Imperio de Dracula features a vampire who resembles Herman Robles rather than Eric del Castillo. Shot in February 1967 at the Churubusco Studios, Doctor Satán y la magia negra is a sequel to 1966's Doctor Satán. The first movie starred Joaquin Cordero as Plutarco Satán, a servant of the devil whose nefarious activities attract the attention of Interpol agent Mateos. For the sequel, original director Miguel Moraida was replaced by Rogelio González Jr., and most of the cast, with the exception of star Joaquin Cordero, was also new. The sequel was made in color, which had become the standard in Mexican cinema. Like the first film, the second grafts fantasy elements onto a spy thriller framework. Plutarco Satán and Asian vampire Ye Lin contend for possession of the Sorensen formula, which converts base metals into gold. Although Ye Lin, played by Noe Murayama, born in Mexico of Asian descent, is clearly a vampire, he bites people in the neck, has long fangs, and can change into a bat, he is never referred to as a vampire in the film itself. Plutarco calls him a brujo, a wizard or warlock. He does not need blood to survive and has no problems walking around in broad daylight. If you are wondering how Plutarco, as a representative of the devil, could defend himself against a vampire, this is cleverly resolved at the climax, when Plutarco's 2 female zombies hold Ye Lin at bay with inverted crosses. The vampire is then dispatched with a stake through the heart. Ye Lin's assistant is played by Aurora Clavel, who would return as the partner of vampire villain Count Frankenhausen in Chanok vs. El Tigre y el Vampiro in 1973. Also in the cast are Sonia Furió and Luz Maria Aguilar as Dr. Satán's undead henchwomen, and the original Count Frankenhausen himself, Carlos Agosti, in a supporting non-vampire role. Although never dubbed into English, Los Vampiros is nonetheless fairly well known internationally thanks to its combination of vampires, John Carradine, and masked wrestler Mil Mascaras. In 1967, producer Luis Enrique Vergara hired John Carradine to star in 4 feature films. Unlike Boris Karloff, who shot the scenes for his Vergara movies in Southern California, Carradine actually traveled to the America studios in Mexico City. Los Vampiros was shot there in September 1967. Vampire film veteran Federico Curiel directed the film, which features Carradine as the last male vampire in existence, Branus. Much of the action involves political intrigue among various factions of green leotard-clad vampire women, led by Aura, the Mexican leader, and Dracula's widow Varia. Wrestling hero Mil Mascaras is chosen against his will to become the new vampire king. This doesn't work out well for the vampire cult. Maria Duval, the non-vampire heroine of Santo vs. Las Mujeres Vampiro, plays Varia with Puerto Rican actress Marta Romero as her rival. Maura Monti, perhaps best known as the Mexican Batwoman, is the damsel in distress this time. Pedro Armendariz Jr., who would face non-supernatural vampire bats in 1974's Chosen Survivors, assists Mil Mascaras in his vampire hunting. Dagoberto Rodriguez, who had last confronted vampires as El Charro de las Calaveras, plays a skeptical police inspector this time. Filmed at the America Studios concurrently with Los Vampiros in early fall 1967, La Endemoniada is an uncredited remake of Mario Bava's La Máscara del Demonio, aka Black Sunday. Alfredo Ruanova contributed another vampire movie script to his filmography. The director of La Endemoniada was Emilio Gomez Muriel, who made 21 movies from scripts written by the prolific Ruanova. Gomez Muriel and Ruanova were also producing partners. Curiously, Argentine star Libertad Leblanc, who plays the possessed woman of the title, is not a vampire here. She's an evil temptress who is revived after 400 years by vampire Gonzalo and resumes her lecherous and murderous ways. In Bava's original film, villainous Asa, played by Barbara Steele, is revived first and then summons her henchman Javuto from his grave. Additionally, Asa and Javuto are both vampires in Black Sunday, unlike La Endemoniada, where Gonzalo is the only one. Gonzalo was played by Enrique Rocha, a young actor of the 60s who very rarely appeared in fantasy films. His only other significant genre role was as the devil in Satanico Pandemonium in 1973. Libertad Leblanc, as mentioned earlier, was from Argentina. She appeared in a fair number of Mexican films and co-productions in the latter half of the 60s before returning to her homeland. Leblanc was known for her sexy roles and frequent on-screen nudity, and appears in several scenes in La Endemoniada in various states of undress, at least in the export version of the movie. Mexican audiences saw an edited, tamer version. The cast also includes a number of Mexican vampire movie veterans, such as Jose Baviera from El Mundo de los Vampiros, Berta Moss from El Vampiro Sangriento en La Invasión de los Vampiros, Agustin Martinez Solares Jr., later seen as Wolfman Rufus Rex in Santo y Blue Demon vs. Dracula y el Hombre Lobo, and Adriano Roel, who would encounter vampires again in Alucarda. Although the 1960s was the vampire decade in Mexican cinema, the undead creatures were not yet vanquished and would return to the screen in the 70s, 80s, and 90s.